Hey everyone, it's Shelbra, and look, I know we don't usually get this serious on this channel, but there's something happening right now that's so important, so impactful, that it felt wrong not to talk about it. We're talking about the war in Israel. I know, it can feel really overwhelming, really complicated. There's so much history, so many sides, and honestly, it's hard to even know where to start. But that's exactly why we're here. We're going to break down the top 10 questions people are asking about this conflict, try to understand the nuances, and hopefully get a little closer to understanding what's at stake. Because even though it's happening thousands of miles away for many of us, this war has implications for the entire world. So let's dive in.
To understand what's happening today, we have to go back, way back. We're talking centuries, even millennia. This land, this region, it's considered holy by multiple religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and that shared history is part of what makes it so complex. For Jews, it's the land of their ancestors, the land promised to them by God, according to their religious texts. They trace their history back thousands of years in this region. For Palestinians, it's the land they've called home for generations. They have their own history, their own culture, and a deep connection to this place. And see, that's where things start to get tangled, because both sides feel a deep, profound connection to this land. And that makes finding a peaceful solution incredibly difficult. Fast forward to the early 20th century, and things get even more complicated. The Ottoman Empire, which had ruled the region for centuries, collapses after World War I. The British take control, and they make promises to both Jews and Palestinians about establishing independent states. But these promises end up contradicting each other, and tensions continue to rise. In 1948, Israel declares independence. But this declaration leads to war with neighboring Arab states, and many Palestinians are displaced from their homes. This event is known as the Nakba, or catastrophe, by Palestinians. Several wars and countless conflicts follow, and with each passing decade, the situation becomes more intractable, the grievances deeper, and the hope for peace seems to dwindle.
All right, so who are the main players in this conflict? On one side, you have Israel, a nation with a democratically elected government and a modern military. Israel sees itself as a Jewish state, a haven for Jews around the world, especially after the horrors of the Holocaust. They believe they have a right to exist within secure borders and defend themselves against attack. On the other side, you have the Palestinian Authority, which governs parts of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. They are recognized by many countries as the legitimate representatives of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian Authority seeks an independent state of their own in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. They argue that Palestinians have been denied their own homeland and subjected to decades of occupation and discrimination. But it's not just about Israel and the Palestinian Authority. There are other groups involved, and their roles are crucial. One of the most significant is Hamas. Hamas is a militant Islamist group that controls the Gaza Strip. They do not recognize Israel's right to exist and have engaged in armed conflict with Israel for years. It's important to note that not all Palestinians support Hamas's tactics, and there's a wide range of political opinions within Palestinian society. Beyond the immediate players, you also have regional powers like Iran, which supports groups opposed to Israel, and countries like Egypt and Jordan, which have played a role in mediating past peace agreements.
So we've talked about the long and complicated history here, but how did we get from that to, well, this? What were the sparks that lit this particular fire? There's rarely a single match, you know? It's more like a slow burn, a buildup of kindling. It's like the difference between striking a match on a calm day versus in a windstorm. controversial policy decision acted as a catalyst, escalating the situation. Imagine a pot of water simmering on the stove. Then someone cranks up the heat. The neighboring country responded with retaliatory strikes. This led to international condemnation. It's like a horrifying game of dominoes. This escalation wasn't happening in a vacuum. The international community played a role too. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the complexity. Understanding the nuances is crucial for imagining a different path forward.
All right, so to understand where this conflict might go, we need to understand the goals of each side. What are they fighting for? What would victory look like for them? Now, it's important to remember that within these groups, there are a range of perspectives, but broadly speaking, Group 1 claims their primary goal is self-determination. They argue that they are entitled to a separate state because of their historical and cultural ties to the land. And it's easy to understand the appeal of this narrative. Who doesn't want to be safe? Who doesn't want self-determination? However, critics of Group 1 argue that their true objectives are the expansion of territory. They point to recent land acquisitions as proof that Group 1's stated goals may not tell the whole story. And, let's be honest, history is full of examples of groups with stated aims that don't quite line up with the reality of their actions. It's tempting to want to neatly categorize things, to say this side is right and that side is wrong. But the world rarely offers such simple answers. Now, on the other side of the conflict, we have Group 2. They claim to be fighting for national unity. They argue that the disarmament of Group 1 is necessary to achieve peace and stability. Their narrative often focuses on historical grievances and the threat posed by the other side. They point to past attacks as evidence that their concerns are valid and that their actions are justified. And again, it's important to acknowledge that these concerns are often rooted in very real and very painful experiences. However, critics of Group 2 argue that their pursuit of these goals has resulted in human rights violations. They claim that Group 2's actions are counterproductive and only serve to perpetuate the cycle of violence. And, unfortunately, the evidence often supports this claim. It's easy to get lost in the rhetoric, to be swayed by one side's propaganda or another's emotional appeals. But it's crucial to remember that behind the headlines, behind the political speeches, are real people whose lives are being irrevocably shaped by this conflict.
So, how has the rest of the world reacted to this whole situation? Sometimes it feels like international relations are just high school with fancier suits. There are cliques, alliances, and a whole lot of drama. The international community's response has been mixed, reflecting complex geopolitical interests. Some countries have expressed strong condemnation and called for a ceasefire. They often base their stance on international law or strategic alliances. They might provide humanitarian aid or diplomatic pressure, but their motivations are rarely simple. Other countries have been more hesitant, calling for restraint or offering to mediate. This reluctance can be perceived as apathy, with real consequences. Now, it's not just individual countries grappling with this crisis. International organizations like the United Nations have played a complicated role. The UN provides humanitarian assistance and tries to broker ceasefires. It condemns human rights violations and offers a platform for smaller countries. However, its effectiveness is hampered by the veto power of permanent members. Despite challenges, the UN continues to strive for peace, a crucial endeavor.
So, we've talked about the geopolitics, the history, the motivations, but it's crucial to remember that at the heart of this conflict, like any conflict, are human beings. Human beings whose lives are irrevocably altered, who face unimaginable loss and displacement. The UN estimates that over insert number people have been displaced by the fighting, forced to flee their homes, seeking refuge in overcrowded shelters or neighboring countries. Can you imagine having to leave behind everything you know, everything you love, because staying means risking your life and the lives of your loved ones? And then there's the death toll. While it's difficult to get precise numbers during an active conflict, the confirmed civilian casualties are already in the insert number range, and that number is tragically climbing every day. Each one of those numbers represents a life cut short, a family torn apart, a future unrealized. And it's a stark reminder of the devastating human cost of this war. It's easy to get lost in the statistics, in the geopolitical analysis, but we have to remember that behind every headline, every policy debate, there are real people suffering the consequences. In the midst of this crisis, humanitarian organizations are working tirelessly to provide essential aid to those affected by the conflict. Groups like the Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders, and countless local organizations are delivering food, water, medical supplies, and other essential services to those who need it most. However, the ongoing fighting and the volatile security situation often make it incredibly challenging and dangerous for these organizations to access those in need. Imagine trying to deliver life-saving medical supplies while bombs are falling, or trying to negotiate safe passage through areas controlled by different armed groups. There have been heartbreaking reports of hospitals being bombed, aid convoys being attacked, and humanitarian workers being caught in the crossfire. This not only endangers the lives of those delivering aid, but also deprives desperate people of the assistance they so desperately need. It's a dire situation that underscores the urgent need for a ceasefire, for safe humanitarian corridors, and for all parties to the conflict to respect international humanitarian law and allow aid to reach those who need it most.
So, is there any hope for peace? It can feel pretty bleak, I know, but amidst the devastation and despair, there are glimmers of hope, however fragile they may seem. The international community has a crucial role to play in pushing for a peaceful resolution to this conflict, and there have been some efforts, however halting, to get the two sides talking. Various countries and international organizations have been engaged in shuttle diplomacy, trying to broker a ceasefire and restart peace negotiations. The UN Security Council, for example, has called for an immediate cessation of hostilities and a return to dialogue, though getting all parties to agree on the terms of a ceasefire and a path forward is proving incredibly difficult. One of the main challenges is the deep mistrust between the two sides. Years of violence and broken promises have created a chasm of suspicion, making it incredibly hard to find common ground. But despite these obstacles, it's crucial that the international community doesn't give up on diplomacy. We need to keep the channels of communication open, encourage dialogue, and explore every possible avenue for a peaceful resolution.
We've talked about top-down solutions, the role of governments and international organizations, but peace often starts from the ground up, with everyday people bridging divides. Incredible individuals and organizations promote dialogue, understanding, and reconciliation. They organize dialogues, workshops, and peace marches, sharing stories, hopes, and fears. These grassroots efforts are vital, reminding us of the human spirit's capacity for empathy and connection. Okay, so how do we even begin to understand this complex conflict? Well, for most of us, our understanding of what's happening comes from the media. We read news articles, watch TV reports, scroll through social media feeds, and these sources, whether we realize it or not, shape our perception of the conflict. But here's the thing. Media coverage is rarely objective. It's filtered through various lenses, political biases, editorial decisions, even the limitations of language itself. And this filtering can lead to skewed narratives, oversimplifications, and sometimes even outright misinformation. For example, some media outlets might focus heavily on one side's narrative while downplaying or even ignoring the others. Or they might rely on sensationalized images and emotionally charged language that can inflame tensions and reinforce existing prejudices. And then there's social media, which has become a breeding ground for misinformation and propaganda. It's easier than ever for false or misleading information to spread like wildfire, further polarizing public opinion and making it even harder to have nuanced conversations about the conflict. So how do we navigate this complex media landscape? Well, it all starts with being critical consumers of information. We have to remember that every story has multiple sides, every event multiple interpretations. Don't just rely on a single source for your news. Seek out diverse perspectives from reputable media outlets. Pay attention to the language used, the images chosen, and ask yourself, whose voices are being amplified and whose are being silenced? And speaking of voices, be wary of those who claim to have all the answers, who paint the conflict in black and white terms. The truth, as always, is far more nuanced, far more complicated. It's easy to get caught up in the emotional intensity of the coverage, to feel overwhelmed by the complexity of it all. But it's precisely in these moments that critical thinking and media literacy become even more crucial. Because ultimately, understanding the role of media in shaping our perceptions is essential not only for forming informed opinions, but also for engaging in productive conversations about how to move forward.
Okay, so we've talked about the human cost, the geopolitical chess game, but wars like this, they don't exist in a vacuum. They impact everything. We're talking global economics here, making your morning coffee more expensive or throwing industries into a tailspin. Energy is a major factor. This region is a major oil and gas hub, and disruptions send shockwaves through the global energy market. That affects transportation costs and goods prices. Global supply chains are disrupted by conflict. Factories shut down, shipping routes rerouted, creating shortages and delays. The economic implications are complex and far-reaching. It's about the interconnectedness of our world and how conflict in one region can have a butterfly effect globally. Then there's the issue of reconstruction. Wars are devastating, not just in terms of human life, but also in terms of infrastructure, economies, you name it. Rebuilding after a conflict like this takes time, resources, and a whole lot of investment. And even when the guns fall silent, the economic uncertainty lingers. Businesses are hesitant to invest, tourism dries up, and it can take years, sometimes decades, for a region to recover fully from the economic wounds of war. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? This conflict, like all conflicts, is not just about borders and ideologies. It's about people's livelihoods, their futures, their ability to simply put food on the table. The economic fallout from this war is a stark reminder that peace isn't just about the absence of fighting. It's about creating the conditions for stability, growth, and a future where people can thrive, not just survive. All right, so here we are at the big question, the one everyone's asking, how is this going to end? And if I had a crystal ball that could give us a definitive answer, well, let's just say I wouldn't be making YouTube videos. The truth is, predicting the future, especially when it comes to complex geopolitical situations like this, is a fool's errand. There are so many variables at play, so many actors with different agendas, that any prediction is bound to be wrong. But that doesn't mean we can't analyze the situation, look at the historical context, the current trends, and try to make some educated guesses about the most likely scenarios. And hey, even if we can't predict the future, sometimes just thinking about the possibilities can help us understand the present a little better. So, let's put on our speculative hats, fire up our critical thinking engines, and dive into the murky waters of potential outcomes. One possibility, and let's be honest, it's the one we all hope for, is a negotiated settlement. Maybe, just maybe, the exhaustion of war, the mounting pressure from the international community, and the sheer human cost will push the parties towards the negotiating table. Another scenario, and it's a grim one, is that the conflict drags on, becoming a protracted stalemate. Think trench warfare, years of grinding violence, neither side able to achieve a decisive victory, but both unwilling to back down. It's a recipe for endless suffering, and sadly, history is full of such examples. Of course, there's always the wild card scenario, the one nobody sees coming. A sudden shift in the balance of power, an unexpected international intervention, a black swan event that changes everything. It's impossible to predict, but in situations like this, the unexpected has a way of happening. The most likely outcome? Honestly, nobody knows. But what we do know is that the choices made today by leaders, by citizens, by all of us, will shape the future of this conflict and the lives of millions caught in its crossfire.
And that's where we leave it, folks. The Israel war, a conflict with deep roots, complex dynamics, and no easy answers. We've covered a lot of ground from the historical background to the potential outcomes, but one thing is clear. This is a situation that demands our attention, our empathy, and our engagement. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe for more content. Let us know in the comments what other topics you'd like us to cover. Stay informed and stay safe.